This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, and ideas from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Connect with us to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I am your host, Jamie Wood. Our topic today, selling niche audiences. Now, whether you are selling trade media, business media, alternative media, some new emerging platform, even if you're in broadcast media, but you've got certain properties or certain environments or certain brands that you represent in your product suite that have a more kind of specialized audience or a more niche audience offering, you will probably know that this type of audience is actually surprisingly challenging to sell. You've got a lot of things that are kind of working against you. You know, you've got the pre-established structures for planning and buying media, you know, primarily based on sort of broadcast reach. You've got a lot of debate around some of the more subjective metrics or the softer metrics like audience quality, like brand, like environment, like content, engagement, attention, et cetera, or just generally what I find with a lot of people who sell more specialized, more niche audiences is that they just have a much longer sales cycle because not only do they have to, you know, identify and target and prospect the right kind of advertiser, but then there's a very robust client education process that has to happen too. You know, selling a highly engaged and highly targeted audience can require a lot more heavy lifting on behalf of the media sales professional versus maybe selling a more of a mass niche type of broadcast medium. Fortunately, if you can get it right, it can be very lucrative and very effective for the advertiser as well. Our guest today is Kylie Merritt. Kylie is the founder, managing director of ausbiz. I'm going to get her to talk more about who they are, what they do, but you'll see very quickly why she would be the perfect person to talk to on this topic. Excited to get into this one now.
The first five.
Kylie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
I really appreciate you making time. I know we've tried to coordinate this a bit and I've been a bit all over the place. But given the topic of selling niche audiences, I remember hearing you on the MI3 podcast and hearing a bit about ausbiz. And I really wanted to get you for this episode. So I'm glad you could make it. Tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us a bit about your background in media, and would love to kind of get a better understanding of, you know, how ausbiz was founded and what the sort of genesis of the business was.
Sure. Well, I mean, if you go right back to the very beginning, I went to university to study advertising and fell into journalism. And it's funny how these things work out because now I'm selling advertising. But way back at the beginning, I started as a television news reporter in country New South Wales. I did that for a while. And then about 20 years ago, I moved to Sydney to work for David Kochie. This was before sort of the Sunrise juggernaut. So I worked for him in his family business, and we produced business and finance content for all kinds of clients. Seven, Fairfax at the time, News Corp, 2GB, Yahoo, Sky. And I really at that point sort of started to fall in love with business journalism. And then that was what I did for the next kind of 12, 13 years. Running newsrooms, reporting, presenting. I really loved business. I sort of felt like I'd found my niche. And then about 10 years ago, I guess, you know, part of it was learning about business and kind of being ensconced in that world of finance and markets. And then I started moving more into the commercial side of the business. So I did a bunch of different roles at News Corp, predominantly at Sky, but some other sort of parts with the parent company, and sort of slowly moved more and more into the commercial side of the business, which was a great experience because, you know, it gave me a chance to work across all kind of roles, you know, obviously beginning in editorial, but then moving more into the product side, into digital, and then into the sort of the sales space. And then Kochie and I, you know, we stayed sort of friends throughout that whole period. And 4 years ago, we decided that because there was a space for a live business and markets channel, that we would start ausbiz, and we would do it as a streaming platform as opposed to sort of a more traditional try and get back into that TV space. So we launched in March 2020. We went live. We stream 7 hours a day, and which equates to about 40 interviews each day, which are then made available on demand, either as individual interviews or as programs. And that's essentially ausbiz. We do another couple of podcasts every day and 11 newsletters a week. But the core of the business is video.
Perfect. And that's what led me to reach out to you, because today the topic's all about selling niche audiences. And I sort of said in the intro, that's anything from what you might call trade media, what you might call more sort of specialized media, business media, even just new emerging platforms or particular environments that broadcasters have. Tell us a bit about the audience profile of ausbiz. And I'm particularly keen to understand, when you were initially starting out with ausbiz, like how difficult was it to commercialize this audience in the early days?
Oh, it's been a journey. Look, I guess the audience for business news and information as a general genre isn't, especially niche. It's a fairly large group of people who are interested in that. And so we didn't set out at the beginning to be overly targeted. Our kind of view was that, anyone who was interested in investing or business, we would have something for them. So we didn't have a particular kind of demographic in mind. But and it's funny because our demos have shifted quite a lot since we launched, and that probably does have something to do with the pandemic as well. And we launched 10 days into the first lockdown, so when we launched, our audience was a lot younger. I don't know if you remember back then, there was a huge surge in people starting to invest for the first time. That was the kind of the GameStop, the Robin Hood
Yes.
type era. So that's all gone away now. And over time, we took the decision that we weren't going to be a platform where people would come to learn about investing. We were very much sort of producing content for people who already understood how markets worked, and we were kind of helping them get that information to make decisions about investing. So over time, our audience is kind of self-selected, and we've decided to really kind of double down on the demo that we've got. So that is, in terms of traditional demographics, it's predominantly sort of over 50. It does skew heavily male, but they're not so much the demos that are of interest to us. So the ones that we really look at are, are they investing within a self-managed super fund? So around half of our audience falls into that category. Almost all of our audience are partly or entirely self-directed. So, they're coming to us for this information to help them make decisions to invest, on their own. And around half also meet the sophisticated investor test. So that is essentially means that you have to get a letter from your accountant to say that you either earn more than 250 grand a year and have done for the past few years, or you have $2 million in outside the family home that you can invest. So it's a way of testing whether people, I guess, have the means, but also I guess the nous to be making decisions around what they invest in, because we're not talking about putting $500. We're not sort of talking about those kind of investments. We're talking to people who might be interested in investing $100, $200, $300,000 at a time.
So straight away, it's really interesting hearing that it's not just about a demographic play, although there is a demographic or an audience. There's a level of commonality that you might start to unearth in the audience too. It's probably a good setup for the main topic.
Media sales mastery.
Because I want to talk about audience currency, right? Like, I hear what you're talking about there and I go, if I'm an advertiser, like, that is absolutely like gold in terms of people that have high net wealth, people that are very attuned to financial markets, people that are maybe at a later life stage but are probably still generating an income, probably own assets but are looking to invest and acquire more. So you've kind of got this passionate audience. Obviously, it's very engaged in the content you're doing. There's natural segmentation sort of built in. How do you create a value or a currency of this audience when you take it to market outside of here's the number that we reach? Like, how do you sort of paint that picture of who that ideal, I guess I would say customer, who that ideal customer is that you can bring to market?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I think it comes back to we don't talk about it all the time, and we don't go out and say this is what we are. But when you look at what we do, and if you're in our newsroom, we are like truly audience first. It's not something we say because, it's a platitude. We actually really are. And I go back to that point I made a minute ago. The reason that we put the need to produce content and be very, very upfront with our audience and build trust with them because of why they're coming to us. So what I mean by that is, we're not trying to, we're not playing ads, Coke versus Pepsi, and if they buy one can and they don't like it, they've wasted $2-3. This is people are coming to us to get information about making very large investments. Often this is their retirement savings, etc. So it's really important that we're very upfront with everybody who is watching ausbiz, and that we have integrity. And so we, in our last survey, 94% of our audience who took the survey said that they trust us to provide, credible, informative and transparent information. And so we won't do anything that damages that trust. And we're really, really clear with our commercial partners about that. And what that then does is the most part, they see that does provide value to them, particularly in the longer term. So when you've got that really engaged audience and you've built that trust, you can start bringing in the right commercial partners to talk to them at a point where they're already qualified, they're pretty far down towards the bottom of the funnel, and that's often where we kind of take the sales part, if you like, out of our TV environment and we put it into our newsletters and virtual events, and that's where our commercial partners can sort of interact on a more one-to-one basis with our audience.
Okay.
And so that is it's kind of, I guess the currency, if you like, is that trust, and then being able to connect the right people in the audience at oftentimes at a one-to-one level with the people who are advertising something to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think obviously your background as working in the content side of businesses and working as a presenter yourself, I'm not surprised to hear that's maybe the ethos of the business around being audience first. I'm curious as to how that audience first type of ethos translates to unearthing unique insights about the audience that might be relevant or applicable to advertisers. Like, what's your process look like in terms of, this is what the audience is kind of wanting, or this is what the audience is telling us they're enjoying. When we design a campaign for a client, these are some things to kind of bear in mind when designing that campaign to get that most effective kind of outcome and engagement. Yeah.
It's a great question, and it's really interesting because when we first launched, we sort of built ausbiz in 12 weeks, go to woe. It was pretty crazy, and we launched and we got on air and we were doing all this content, and then we're like, wow, we really don't have great analytics, and we're really not sure who all these people who are watching are. We don't really know very much about them. So ever since then we've now got a proper CRM, and we've been doing a lot more work in that space. So and it's important to us, again, audience first. It's not just so that we can understand the audience and segment them and help our commercial partners talk to them. We use that data now very much to drive the content that we do. So the sorts of content and the weighting of different interviews that we do now compared to 3 years ago are completely different. When we launched, I think we looked a lot more like, a few of us here were there at the very beginning days of Sky News Business. So we looked very much kind of like that. It was very traditional TV, top of the hour, news headlines, all of that sort of stuff. And then over time, we started really looking at the data. And again, as people started going back to the office after COVID, the viewing habits changed again, and people started watching less live, more on demand. And that really gave us, a very clear indication of what people were interested in. And so we started shaping all of the content to meet that. And then at the same time, we started looking at who these people are who are watching and why. So there's been a lot of trial and error, but now there's pretty much kind of 4 sources, I would say. We do a major survey once a year, which is pretty in-depth, which goes into detail of our audience on, their investing preferences, down to how much sort of money they have, to be crude, all kinds of things, why they watch, what they like watching, what they want to see more of, all that sort of stuff. We look at a user level at what they're watching on demand, and also just obviously across the board, and that helps us derive insights for our commercial partners. Newsletter content, again, it's we make editorial decisions about what goes into our newsletters, but then we monitor what people are clicking on and clicking through from the newsletters to engage with. We do probably 1 or 2 virtual events every month. They are generally with or on behalf of a commercial partner, but the process for those virtual events is that people have to register to attend them, and usually there are qualifying questions. Again, it could be, do you have an SMSF? Do you meet the wholesale investor test? But sometimes it's the size of the portfolio. Depending on what the event is around, there will be more kind of capturing information during that registration process. So all of that again goes back to the user's profile, and you can sort of aggregate that data across and see what that's telling you about who these people are. And again, all of that can now be done. You can sort of see at a single user view of all of those components, which you can then start to segment and talk to advertisers about. We've got these people. What can we do to talk to the right ones, the right groups for you?
Yeah, great. And so I'm curious where sort of product or inventory or platform kind of comes into it. So great audience first ethos with content, great insights, really good kind of understanding of the audience and what's their profile is, what their habits are. What's the role of like environment or the ausbiz brand, or some of those things you said, like newsletters and events where you do more of an integrated kind of approach? How heavily skewed towards that kind of stuff is it, or how much of a differentiator is that stuff versus just the audience proposition?
We don't sort of have a cookie cutter, this is a campaign, or, here is our rate card.
Yeah.
Buy these 30-second TVCs. It's not generally how we work. But for most clients, particularly if they have there might be a boutique fund manager, or, they're a multifamily office, or that they don't have a mass reach kind of brand. Generally, what we would do with them is some kind of a brand campaign, in that we just, it's program sponsorships and bits and pieces throughout the day. So just to kind of, get their name in front of the ausbiz audience, so that there's that kind of recognition. And then in terms of the actual sales part, that would generally happen more at a newsletter or an events sort of strategy. So we try and move them through that funnel. The events are, I guess, by far the most direct, in that, if you are a commercial partner of one of our events, people have to register to attend that. And we're very clear, the audience understands that they will be marketed to afterwards if they attend that event. But I guess the difference being, it's not, for them, it's not like necessarily receiving a cold call and being flogged something they don't want, because generally they're coming to those events because they have a specific interest in that product or service. So it's a very, very warm lead, which we provide to the commercial clients afterwards. And that, that's worked well for us, but it really has worked well for our commercial partners.
So talking of commercial partners, this is what I'm curious about too, because what does that process look like of obviously identifying who might be a good brand fit, and what does that sort of process look like in terms of targeting those relevant clients to bring on board?
Yeah. In our team of 2, I wouldn't say there's a huge process. I mean, I guess I do come at this from a slightly weird sort of perspective, in that, I've been a journalist covering these businesses and involved with these businesses and talking to experts in these businesses for 20 years. So you kind of have that network already of, people to talk to. So getting introductions and getting a foot in the door has never really been a problem. I would say that most of our clients have come either from within that network, or from referrals from other partners who've done stuff with us that's worked with well, or often it's they've been a guest on ausbiz as an expert, and someone has a potential client has called or downloaded something from their website or whatever it might be, and said they've seen them on ausbiz, and they've got that sort of aha moment when they've realized that
Yeah.
this is a great channel for them. So then they might come back to us and say, can we advertise with you? Like, what do you these you've got to remember, like, most of the people that we work with are not, we're not talking about working with, say, the Commonwealth Bank with an agency and a gigantic marketing team. We're talking about working with, boutique fund managers who may only have 10 people in the business. They don't have anyone doing their marketing. They're getting their clients through referrals, word of mouth, through financial advisors. They don't generally sort of advertise. They certainly don't have television commercials. So they've realised that that ausbiz is one of a couple of channels where these target clients are, and so they've come to us and said, "Oh, like, can we do something with you? Do you even advertise?" Like, they don't know. So we work with them, or they're probably subscribers as well, so they might be watching the channel and they might see some form of commercial content on there, or they might receive a Solus EDM on behalf of somebody else, and then they'll come back to me and say, "Oh, can we send one of those?" And that kind of just starts the conversation.
Yeah.
And then the process of that is, again, it's I think this comes back to my journalism background, is it's not just kind of getting in there and trying to sell them something. So there's a lot of asking questions and sort of distilling concepts for them, trying to understand which part of our audience might be interested in what they have, and then it's very collaborative. Like, there is no set, this is the product, would you like to buy it or not? Yeah.
No, that's really enlightening, because I think, when I initially heard you getting interviewed on MI3, I think that was part of the debate, was sort of independent media, not playing with the big national brands, or the big consortium agency groups, and whether actually there was a need for a bit of reform there, in terms of if a big brand did want to kind of unlock this audience, they would have to kind of be really open-minded to adapting the way they plan and buy their media, and having it be more of a bespoke, consultative, collaborative approach. I'm curious, in your past, so maybe not just with ausbiz, but have you had those scenarios where you have had like a larger advertiser that's maybe predisposed to buying and planning media a particular way, that wanted to work with you, like, and maybe that process was difficult? Like, has it been your experience that certain clients get to a certain size where they maybe don't understand the world of more sort of business media or more niche audiences?
Look, sometimes with agencies, I think there is a bit of a mismatch, just because, the agency and the mass reach media world have built their systems and structures and processes, and that works when you are advertising mass reach products. So, there's a lot of boxes that get ticked, and we don't kind of fit that. You can't really, I mean, if you looked at what we cost on a purely CPM basis, it wouldn't stack up. But we know, from our commercial partners, that we deliver leads, way over and above any other forms of mass reach that they've tried. So, there's, I guess, a bit of an education process there, but then we're not on the list. We don't get briefed by agencies unless, there's a handful of niche agencies that work in the financial services space. But generally, the big ones, we don't tend to work with, just, because we can't shoehorn ourselves to fit into the processes that they have. And I understand that. It's, where it's chalk and cheese, we're selling, very different things. What I would say is, generally, if we are working with some of the bigger brands, and we do, like IG, NabTrade are two of our biggest clients, but generally those relationships are directly with the in-house marketing teams.
Yeah.
And then, the agencies are kind of brought in afterwards, and that's more of a, a lot of the time that's just for invoicing and just doing all the
hygiene
type
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I guess it comes back to the sorts of clients that really get value out of what we do. They also don't use agencies. Like I said, a lot of them might have, you know, maybe one person doing all of their marketing, if they even do have someone doing any of their marketing. Often we become kind of their quasi marketing people. So, you know, they come and they don't really know, they just know they want more clients. They've got to, you know, they might have 6 BDMs who want leads, but they don't have anyone kind of doing that piece of work between the media and how they get the leads.
Yeah.
Because, you know, in the past, it's all been purely targeted at, you know, working with financial advisors and just word of mouth and network. So we're sort of a bit of an outlier. We come in and sort of help in that space.
You mentioned something in that last answer around delivering leads and delivering inquiries, at a really high rate. Like, what role does a case study play in terms of the sales process? Like, is proof of concept something that you guys are constantly trying to kind of take to market when new brands are wanting to come on board?
Yeah, look, it's definitely a really good starting point. If we do a case study around, you know, a campaign that we've run or a specific event or whatever it might be, we do them and we share them, but more often we'd sort of just use it as a bit of a concept, as a starting point, and then say we'd like to sort of design something bespoke for them. I'm also, probably to my detriment, a really big believer in kind of the under promise, over deliver. So if something has worked really well for one client, you know, I would never guarantee that it'll do the same for another, because all of their products are different. And, you know, again, it's like that decision process. It's not just, are you going to buy a can of Coke or a can of Pepsi? And if you don't like them, it's $4. It's like, are you going to invest in this fund or that fund? And the difference between the two could be, you know, over a period of 5 years, it could be 200 grand in, you know, your personal bottom line. So there's also, it's funny, like there's only so much we can do, but the quality of the product on the other end, in that lead space, you know, that has to stack up as well. So we are doing a lot more in that lead space. It does mean that we take on a lot more of the risk up front, but the upside is higher. And the clients like that because, you know, they're not paying stupid amounts of money and they're not getting anything out of it. They're only paying if, you know, if they are getting clients. But again, that's why I go back to that. It's just so important to understand who they are, what they're selling, what they're trying to achieve before we even start doing a campaign for them, because the products are so wildly different.
Yeah, and that was kind of a segue into the final question in this segment, which was around types of advertisers or types of client. Like, I think in particular, like business media, trade media, more specialized kind of more boutique kind of media channels, the advertising target clients or the potential partners can be quite obvious. You know, in your case, like self-managed super fund and stuff like that, it's like the relevant advertisers are really glaringly obvious. I'm curious if you've had success or experience taking the ausbiz audience proposition to a completely different category, like you know, that high value, high net worth audience, and how that might translate to like luxury brands or travel or different verticals. Is that something you've sort of dabbled in before?
It's something that we've looked at, but it's a bit tricky with our model because we don't do display, we don't do pre-roll, so that's sort of where that stuff would fit. You can't really do, for an audience of our size, it doesn't sort of work to go off and spend, you know, $50,000 making a branded content play for something in the luxury space. You know, we looked at it and it was just like, and then again, I come back to the audience first piece. You know, our audience comes and watches our stuff for a very specific reason. Are they coming to us to find out about, you know, luxury cars or watches? Probably not, you know. Travel is an interesting one. It's something I have looked a little bit at. It would be more if there were, you know, I think deals potentially for our users. If there was a, you know, I don't know, X% off a luxury cruise for ausbiz subscribers or something that we could put in a newsletter, that might work. I think our our audience might appreciate stuff where they feel like they're getting value from being part of our community, but just here's our newsletter today with here's what's happened in the markets, and here's a guy talking about a fixed income fund, and here's this and here's that. And here's a pretty ad for a watch. I just think they'd be like, what? That's, I don't need that.
Yeah, fair enough.
So really it's, it is, there is a specific and niche region that people come to us every day. And our view is we just need to keep delivering that, really highly valuable content to keep them coming back.
Yeah, I love it.
I can't ask my sales manager that.
Okay, final segment is the listener question, because we too here at Media Sales Mastery are audience first. I just thought I'd jam that in because we certainly don't commercialize the podcast. But one of the things that we try to do is get a whole bunch of questions, usually via LinkedIn. And I do have to keep a few of them in the can until we have like a pseudo-relevant topic. But I thought this one was sort of in the same sort of lane. So the question is,
got any tips on what good client prospecting looks like? I'm new to sales and have a very specialized podcast product. How do I increase my odds of succeeding in getting in touch with the right clients?
So a bit to unpack there, but I think knowing what this particular question is they've got a very specialized audience that they are targeting via their podcast. And it's very much being about building the content strategy, building the audience, building the engagement. And now they're at a point of trying to commercialize or productize it. Got any tips for how they may be able to approach that in terms of outreaching to the right kind of clients?
Okay. So I did tell you right back at the beginning that I'm a journalist who has just happened to fall into sales. So mastery, I'm putting in quotes, but I look at a lot of what's going on at the moment in this space, and I know, there's a lot of ground to cover for everybody, but the constant sort of, whacking people on LinkedIn with generic messaging and just sending, sitting there sending emails all day, throwing stuff out into the ether and hoping that something comes back, I'm not sure is the most useful way of doing things. But also, like, this isn't you're not going to be an overnight success in this. A lot of it is building networks. So I make a point of going to way more events than I probably personally would like to, but, you will always in a situation like that at events, like I don't think I've ever been to anything where I haven't come back and, met someone or spoken to someone that hasn't, proven useful to sort of growing that network and, eventually monetizing that. But it's not like you meet someone and they give you 20 grand the next day for an ad campaign. So, you've just got to sort of get yourself out there. Again, it's understanding the product. It's this, I know that's solution-based selling and everybody says they do it, but it's really asking heaps of questions and doing a lot of listening before you even get to the here's what I'm selling, because, people want to feel that you're creating some value for them and that you understand what their issues are before you sort of come back to them. I also think that, like, in general, people are pretty nice and pretty helpful. So I think the question was, how do you, how are you finding the right people within businesses? Again, if you build that network, generally, if you've met someone and you've had a nice conversation with them, they will be quite open to, they might not be the decision maker, but they'll be quite open to sort of putting you in touch with the right people. But again, I just think the most important thing is, understand their product, understand their problem, understand the industry. You've got to read and consume, lots of other media. It takes time. It's not a silver bullet.
No.
But, the best salespeople, are not just good at selling, their product, but they actually understand the entire ecosystem that they're in. So, I consume a lot of other financial media, and it's not like I'm doing it just to see who's advertising where and going after them. It's bigger than that. It's understanding what's going on across the whole industry, and that also helps you shape and figure out what your place is within that sort of space.
It's funny. I was reflecting on this one too, and I was thinking the same thing. There's no silver bullet with this answer. It's a pretty broad question, but I did think the first step of it is like, you've got to have that kind of audience identity. Like, what is it about your audience that makes it distinct and unique and valuable? And then it's kind of like, thinking about, maybe not thinking about everyone as your customer, but thinking about what one or two types of products and or services might this audience be relevant for. Like, almost trying to just kind of take what could be a very broad and complex thing and just bring it down to the simplest thing of, how do I connect this audience with a relevant brand, where it makes sense for both parties. And to your point, I would actually say a very short-term tactical thing is have a look at what other media your audience are consuming. Like what other things are in their diet. Do they read particular digital publications? Do they watch particular programs? Try and have a think about what their media consumption habits are more broadly, and then think about some of the brands that are trying to engage them across those channels as a bit of a takeaway too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Kylie, thanks for your time. This draws us to a close, but I am definitely keen to just spend a bit of time at the back end of this, hearing a bit more about what's happening with ausbiz in the financial year ahead. What's happening? What are the big initiatives you're driving? What's the area of focus at the moment?
So more work both on that audience segmentation piece and how we can allow partners to kind of target niches within niches. I think that will be a really valuable solution. So we're doing some kind of work on our tech stack and our CRM to enable that to happen through automation. We've already implemented some AI into some of our workflows, which has just saved a huge amount of time, which has been great, but I don't think there's that much more on the AI front in the immediate future we need to do. More work on, just that leads piece and how we can connect advertisers to individual investors and, having some really interesting conversations with other kind of investment platforms on how we could almost, bring them together. So if, if someone in our audience sees or hears from an expert, be it a fund manager or whatever, that, there may be a way for them to actually connect directly through our platform and potentially even invest all kind of within the same ecosystem.
Fantastic.
Obviously a pretty big piece of work. And we are, I say we are not a financial services business. So that is, us working with other providers in that space who are, because I don't have any, plans on going into that space really. And then we also, another interesting part of the business, which is not the consumer-facing part, is, we've built this sort of video-led content solution, which is super efficient and, almost entirely cloud-based. So we're actually now starting to work with some big brands, both inside and outside of finance, here and in other international markets, on building similar solutions for them. So that's not really an advertising thing, but it's a technology product, which is interesting and fun.
Sounds unreal. Well, congratulations on the success of the business so far. I love independent media, and I love that you're doing something really different and unique in the Australian marketplace. So thank you for spending time with us. I'll link your details in the show notes. And at some point, Kylie, would love to have you back on the podcast, but thanks for your insights and your contribution today.
Great. Thanks, Jamie.